The wind schemed. Greta pushed her forehead up against the stitched-together asp skins that formed the single window in her family's hut. A speck of sand hit her eye, and she jerked backward, rubbing carefully at it with a cleaner piece of her undershirt. The skins rattled again, billowing in and out, as if they still covered a breathing beast. The wind roared in the distance, an omnipresent sound more insistent than thunder. On the day of an expected return, the wind always schemed. On the flat plains and across the dry wastes, the wind took what it wanted and carried it up against their walls. "Get away from the window, girl." Her mother's voice cracked dry and weak, and another coughing fit began before the last word was all the way out. Greta sat back, gaze still on the gap. She could see the tan street and the tan brick building on the other side. Mordain had never travelled to the trees. His family had no asp skin to cover their windows, and the thin shutter shook and rattled against the wall. "Any sign of the ships? Any word in the market yesterday?" The older woman slumped onto the bench and pulled a cup of water to her lips. "Nothing yesterday, nothing today." She opened her mouth to say more, but a shout from outside interrupted her. "Sails! Sails to the west, and a red flag flying." She rushed back to the gap in the window, just in time to see a man, swathed in billowing linen from head to foot, rush past. One hand cupped his mouth as he shouted the news. Greta bolted to her feet and grabbed her hood and wrap before her mother could open her mouth. She barely heard the "take care" as she struggled to open the door against the wind that rushed down their street. The hood covered her face and kept most of the blowing sand from eyes and mouth. The wrap protected her arms from its stinging blasts. She turned toward the western gate and pushed against the force of the wind. The wind schemed. Others emerged from their houses, bent almost double, wearing hoods or masks, or desperately trying to shield their eyes from the wind. It roared from the west, but now another sound accompanied its tortured voice. Creaking wood, snapping and billowing cloth, and the faint, muffled voices of the men on the ships returning. Greta and the others rounded the corner to find temporary protection along the wall of the stable. Mordain's eldest touched her arm. "Red flags! Did he say red flags?" Although hidden behind a thin mesh of cloth, her eyes still registered fear. "I heard it too," a woman nearby said. She bent forward, hands on her knees, and gasped for breath. Red flags meant blood, death. After harvest the year before, when the wind blew from the east and brought chill instead of heat, the men had readied the 5 ships and set out across the wastes. They did not seek riches or adventure. They travelled across the mysterious shifting sands for survival. Another year's sustenance that only the faraway lands could provide their people. Like every year, the women, old men, and children waited the winter through. Frozen still with waiting. With ice-like shards piercing heart and mind, with thoughts of their kin far away. Before planting, the winds shifted and brought the men back home again. "Come on," the woman said, and straightened up. The group twisted around the corner of the building, leaned into the wind again, and struggled down the next street. A gust knocked Greta's friend from her feet, and she grabbed at her arm before she was swept away through the dust. A murmured thanks, and they trudged on. One of the others who had gotten there before them had opened the western gate's outer doors. The inner doors, carefully woven lattice work, blocked some of the wind and made it possible to stand in a huddle and watch the ships come. Greta peered through a gap in the gate. 3 ships rumbled across the hard-packed sand, masts leaning dangerously over with the force of the wind. Dust-stained sails blew out, crackling along the edge. A red pennant whirled from the top mast, bright as streaming blood or fire. "Just 3 ships?" The gasping woman's hand trembled over her mouth. A murmur ran through the crowd. 20 men to a ship. 5 ships went westward. 3 ships returned. Bretta's mind whispered, "Father, Danvid." It had been the first year her brother was old enough to go. The ships rushed closer, giant wheels rumbling over the dirt, sails snapping, and now men shouting. They scrambled across the tilting decks, pulled lines, shifted weight to stay on course. One sail descended, then another, but not the middle one running to the right of the others. The wind schemed. Bretta felt the shift in force even between the lattice of the inner gate. The flag near the entrance, welcoming the men home again, whipped sideways instead of straight east as it had. The third ship tilted, and the men could do nothing to steady or slow it. The mast swung wide and finally toppled over to land atop the leeward wheels of the ship in front. The tipping deck catapulted men off the ship into the dust. One hit a rope and fell under the wheels of the rear ship. Another gust caught the upright deck and pushed the ship across the sand. The wheels dug grooves deep enough to hide the bodies of the fallen men. The half-furled sails of the lead ship swung wildly to the other side, knocking more men from the deck and turning the ship till it tipped sideways to join the others in a jumble of wood, canvas, and pain. The red pennant snaked across the sand. Above the sound of the wind, Bretta heard the screams start. The woman next to her tugged at the latch on the gate, calling, "Help me! Open it!" Others joined and pushed and heaved against the force of that horrible wind. Finally, it swung open and knocked 2 in the crowd off their feet. They scrambled and struggled toward the wrecked ships. Each mouthed names of their fathers, husbands, friends, but the wind tore them away before they found voice. More women, and those too young, old, or infirm to make the journey, joined their group to fight against the blasts. Mordraine's daughter fell to her knees near the wheel of the first ship, crying out inarticulate sorrow as she cradled the ruined head of her father in her lap. A woman on the other side clawed at the flapping sail to get at her man. He moved painfully on the sand, still alive, but with a leg crushed under a wheel. The next gust of wind knocked Bretta to her knees. All around her women wailed in grief. Men cried in pain. Sailcloth cracked, and the wind roared at the destruction it had wrought. She crawled forward, thoughts and fear jumbled in her mind. The red pennant shifted and blew into her face, knocking off her hood. One arm came up to shield her eyes, but not before she saw them. Her father's arms wrapped tightly around his son's shoulders, as if he could shield him from the danger of collapsing wood. It had not worked. A mast lay across their bodies, now half buried by blowing grit. Her father's unbound hair blew over her brother's face, but she could still see the blood and ruin of his crushed jaw and neck. A desperate scream, a cry of pain, worked its way up Bretta's throat, but the wind would not allow her that one expression of grief and horror. It blew across them all, dead and still living, hopeful and those beyond all hope, and filled their mouths with sand.